Today, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be talking about chapters 7 and 8 of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It's important to recognize that Frankenstein is an epistolary text. Epistolary, of course, meaning a story that is partially told through letters. As we had seen in chapter 6, Victor got a letter from Elizabeth Lavenza communicating her desires to see him and her concern over him, and the introduction to the character of Justine Moritz. In chapter 7, Victor gets another letter. And this one has a different tone to it. This one's from his father. As his father says at the very beginning, you've probably waited impatiently for a letter to fix your date of return to us. And I was first attempted to write only a few lines, merely mentioning the day on which I should expect you. But that would be a cruel kindness, and I dare not do it. What would be your surprise, my son, when you expected a happy and glad welcome, to behold tears and wretchedness? Something has happened. Obviously, Alphonse is upset, and it doesn't take us long in the letter to find out why. As he communicates the news to Victor, William is dead. Now, William, remember, is Victor's youngest brother. William is dead, that sweet child whose smiles delighted and warmed my heart. Victor, he is murdered. We have a murder mystery going on here, ladies and gentlemen. And in this letter, Alphonse lays out what happened. He says, last Thursday, I and my niece and your two brothers went to walk in Plain Palais. The evening was warm and serene. We thought of returning when we had discovered that William and Ernest, who had gone on before, were not to be found. We accordingly rested until they should return. Presently, Ernest came and inquired if we had seen his brother. He said that they had been playing with him and that William had run away to hide himself, and that he vainly sought for him and afterwards waited a long time. So Ernest and William go out to play hide and seek. They're on this picnic out in the park. Ernest and William are playing hide and seek, and apparently William is very good because he goes to hide and Ernest can't find him. This account rather alarmed us, and we continued to search for him until night fell, when Elizabeth conjectured that he might have returned to the house. He was not there. We returned again with torches, for I could not rest while I thought that my sweet boy had lost himself and was exposed to all the damps and dews of the night. About 5 a.m, I discovered my lovely boy, whom the night before I had seen blooming and active in health, stretched on the grass, livid and motionless. The print of the murderous finger was on his neck. So they find him the next morning. They find him in the park, and William has been strangled. And then watch this detail. He was conveyed home, and the anguish that was visible in my countenance betrayed the secret to Elizabeth. She was very earnest to see the corpse. So when they come back to the house, Alphonse is like, oh, I found William. Unfortunately, he is dead. And Elizabeth is like, let me see the body. I need to see the body. Alphonse is like, I tried to prevent her, but she persisted. And when she entered the room, she examined the neck of the victim. So she looks at William's neck. Clasping her hand, she goes, oh my God, I've murdered my darling child. So it seems that Elizabeth is blaming herself for the death. Oh my God, I've murdered my darling child. And it's interesting, by the way, notice how she refers to William as her darling child. Remember, Caroline had asked her to take care of her younger siblings. And so even though Elizabeth had kind of grown up with William as a brother, she kind of views him as her child here. She fainted and was restored with extreme difficulty. When she again lived, it was only to weep and sigh. She told me that same evening, William had teased her to let him wear a very valuable miniature that she possessed of your mother. Elizabeth owned a locket, and in the locket was a picture of Caroline. And before they went on the picnic, William's like, let me wear the locket today. And so, of course, when they bring the body back, Elizabeth notices that the locket is gone and assumes that the person who killed William did so to steal that locket. And so she blames herself for William's death. And so Alphonse does say at the end of the letter, please come home. We need you. Elizabeth's obviously upset. The whole family is grieving over the tragic loss of this young boy. Please come home. And so Victor immediately decides he's got to go home. I've got to go comfort my family. They order the horses and they make the journey back. When they return to Geneva, so they get in the carriage and they make their way back. As Victor returns to Geneva for the first time in several years, he decides that he's going to visit the place of the murder. He's going to go to this park in Plainpalais to visit the site of the murder. And we're given this. The night he returns to go visit, so it's late at night, he goes to visit the park, and all of a sudden a storm rages. Lightning, thunder, rain. And as Victor describes, "While I watched the tempest, so beautiful yet terrific, I wandered on with a hasty step. This noble war in the sky elevated my spirits. I clasped my hands and exclaimed aloud, 'William, dear angel, this is thy funeral, this is thy dirge.'" And as I said these words, so Victor drops to his knees in the rain, in the lightning storm, down by this lake in this park. And he's like, "Oh my God, William, this is thy funeral, this is thy dirge." And as he says it, he describes here, "I perceived in the gloom a figure which stole from behind a clump of trees near me. I stood fixed, gazing intently. I could not be mistaken. A flash of lightning illuminated the object and discovered its shape plainly to me. Its gigantic stature and the deformity of its aspect, more hideous than belongs to humanity, instantly informed me that it was the wretch, the filthy demon to whom I had given life." What did he hear? Could he be, I shuddered at the conception, the murderer of my brother? No sooner did that idea cross my imagination than I became convinced of its truth. My teeth chattered, and I was forced to lean against a tree for support. The figure passed me quickly, and I lost it in the gloom. Nothing in the shape of human could have destroyed that fair child. He was the murderer. I could not doubt it. The mere presence of the idea was an irresistible proof of the fact. I thought of pursuing the devil, but it would have been in vain, for another flash discovered him to be hanging among the rocks of the nearly perpendicular ascent of Mont Saleve, a hill that bound Plainpalais on the south. He soon reached the summit and disappeared. Okay. The evening he returns to the park, he visits the site where William was murdered, and what does he discover? But he sees his monster there. In the flash of lightning, there's his monster. Now, this begs a ton of questions. First of all, obviously, if the monster is really there, how did the monster get there? Remember, this monster was created in Germany, in Ingolstadt, Germany, so like a year prior to this. Like, you have to understand the time. You have to follow the timeline on this as well. You know, this is like a year after creating the monster. How is it that this monster, which was created in Germany, just happens to be at the very site where Victor's brother was murdered? And it's easy to look at this and be like, "Oh, well, the monster killed William." But again, you have to ask yourself, how? How would the monster know where to go? The monster's not intelligent, inarticulate. The monster didn't even know who Victor Frankenstein was. Even if you want to believe the logic that the monster sought out vengeance on Victor, how would the monster ever find Victor's family in Geneva, Switzerland, after being in Germany? The other question you have to ask yourself is, where has this monster been all this time? Last time we saw him, he had just come to life in Victor's apartment, and now he just happens to appear in Geneva, Switzerland. And don't worry, we will get the answers to all this about where this monster has been, but these are the questions you should be asked. Now, the moment Victor sees this monster, Victor becomes convinced that it killed his brother. And the monster quickly disappears. The monster jumps up a mountain and disappears in the rainstorm. And Victor is now convinced that this monster killed his family. Or I'm sorry, killed his brother, excuse me. And so the following morning, Victor does return to his house. And we get this little bit here. 6 years had elapsed, passed in a dream, but for one indelible trace. And I stood in the same place where I'd last embraced my father. So I do want to stand corrected here. It's been more than a year since the monster was created. It's been several. Because remember, it was in about year 2 or 3 that Victor created the monster. And now we're here 6 years later. So between the moments that Victor creates the monster in Germany and the time that he runs into the monster in Geneva, Switzerland, is about 3 years. So again, we have to ask ourselves what's been going on over those 3 years. But now that Victor has returned here, Victor returns to his house. He says, and I stood in the place where I'd last embraced my father before my departure for Ingolstadt. Beloved and venerable parent, he still remained to me. I gazed on a picture of my mother, which stood over the mantelpiece. It was a historical subject painted in my father's desire and represented Caroline Beaufort in the agony of despair, kneeling by the coffin of her dead father. You know, many people, when you enter into their house, many people have pictures of their family. It's not uncommon to have family portraits. I'm sure many of you have family pictures up in your house. It's interesting, though, that Alphonse Frankenstein has a picture in his house of Caroline. But it's not a picture of Caroline smiling and happy. It's not a wedding picture. The picture he has hanging in his house is a picture of Caroline at her father's funeral, at Beaufort's funeral, kneeling, crying, and weeping. Now, that's a weird picture to put up in your house, but I think it's a representation, again, of how men view women in this story. Remember, men view women in this story as objects to be taken care of. Alphonse marries Caroline because Caroline is an orphan who has no one to take care of her and needs to be taken care of. So, of course, his picture of her that he has up in the house is her weak and her desperate, and him coming to save her. Just like Victor is betrothed to Elizabeth, who was an orphan, who has no one to take care of her and needs to be taken care of. This picture, while it doesn't seem to advance the plot, I think does reinforce this theme of trafficking in women, of men feeling a need or a desire to protect women and take care of them. Now, Victor is convinced at this point that the monster killed William, but notice it's not the monster that is arrested. In this chapter, we learn that Justine Moritz, who we were just introduced to in chapter 6, Justine Moritz has been arrested. And you might say to yourself, what is happening here? How is it that Justine, this family friend, this good friend of Elizabeth, how is she arrested? Let's see here. They describe here why she's been arrested. After the death of William, Justine had fallen ill. During this interval, one of the servants happened to be examining the apparel she had worn the night of the murder and discovered in her pocket the picture of my mother. So that same locket that had vanished from William, they find it in Justine's clothes, in the pocket of her clothes. And this is damning evidence. Obviously, she's got the locket on her, and so she is immediately arrested and taken away. Now, Victor doesn't buy this at all. Victor saw his monster. He's convinced that the monster committed the murder, but he can't tell anyone. Number one, if he tried to tell someone about the monster, no one would believe him. What's he going to say? Hey, by the way, I created a monster that's killing my family. No one's going to believe him. But then also, if he does so, is he not culpable? And so he finds himself in this very difficult situation. And Elizabeth doesn't buy it either. Elizabeth's like, I know Justine, she would never do this. And so as you move into chapter 8 gets into the trial of Justine Moritz. We get all the evidence in this chapter here. Let's see here. Okay. The trial began, and the advocate against her had stated the charge. Several witnesses were called. Several strange facts were combined against her. which might have staggered anyone with such proof of her innocence as I had. She had been out the whole night in which the murder had been committed. So again, number one, no one can testify to really where Justine was, except for the fact that she wasn't with the family. She had been out the entire night the murder had been committed, and towards morning, she had been perceived by a market woman not far from the spot where the body of the murdered child had been afterwards found. The woman asked her what she did there, but she looked very strangely and only returned a confused and unintelligible answer. Now, this is weird. The morning that they discover the body of William, they find Justine Moritz in town, and she's confused, and she's offering these unintelligible answers. Something is up here. She returned to the house about 8 o'clock, and when she inquired where they had passed the night, she replied that she had been looking for the child and demanded earnestly if anything had been heard concerning her. So when they asked her what was she doing, even Justine's like, I was out looking for young William. Now, she is offered a chance to defend herself. And she does explain, she does provide her alibi. She says, look, by the permission of Elizabeth, I had passed the evening, the night on which the murder was committed, at the house of an aunt. On her return about 9 o'clock at night, so this is the night that William is missing, she met a man who asked if she had seen anything of the child. So even though she was not at the picnic, the night that William goes missing, Justine Moritz returns, and there's a guy out. And he's like, hey, have you heard about the young Frankenstein boy? He's missing. This is how she finds out that William is gone. She was alarmed by this account and passed several hours looking for him when the gates of Geneva were shut. So again, the city of Geneva has gates. She's out looking for William, and by the time she comes back, she can't get back into the city. So she can't get back into Geneva. So she's forced to spend the night outside the city. And she finds herself, she was forced to remain in a barn belonging to a cottage. This is an important detail. So she spends the night sleeping in a barn, being unwilling to call up the inhabitants to whom she was well known. Most of the night she had spent here watching. Towards morning, she believed that she slept for a few moments. Some steps disturbed her, and she awoke. It was dawn, and she quitted the asylum, that she might again endeavor to find my brother. This paragraph is key. I want you to remember this. We're going to treat this like a fun little murder mystery. I want you to remember this paragraph. She spends the night in a barn. She's like, I think I was asleep for a little time. I heard footsteps. I awoke, and it was morning, and I left. That will be key later. She cannot tell anyone why they found the locket in her clothes. She has no idea how it got there. So they do try to defend her, but this evidence is all too damning. The look on, the look that the market woman sees her, looking confused and unintelligible. She can't, there's no one to corroborate where she was that night. The locket in the pocket, all this is damnable evidence. And at one point, Justine Moritz does confess to the murder. She does confess to killing young William, but she later in the chapter describes, she's like, and you almost have to imagine like people under interrogation. If you've ever heard the idea, like people under interrogation, they almost become convinced that they did commit the crime. And she's like, I just admitted to it hoping that it would give me some salvation. In other words, Justine's like, I realized I was going to be convicted anyways. I thought that maybe if I confessed to it, that they would give me a lower sentence or that I might be absolved in the eyes of God. But she tells in her final moment, she does tell Elizabeth, she's like, Elizabeth, listen, I didn't do this. I didn't kill your brother. Elizabeth makes one more plea to try to save her, but she can't. And Justine is executed in chapter 8. She is executed for the murder of William. And this puts a great deal of internal conflict on William, or on Victor, excuse me. Number one, Elizabeth blames herself. Elizabeth is the one who brought Justine back to the house. Elizabeth is the one that gave the locket to William. All of this, she blames herself not only for the death of William, but now the wrongful execution of Justine. And then Victor also blames himself, obviously, for the fact that Elizabeth's blaming herself. He feels guilt over the fact that he created the monster and yet has told no one. And remember, Victor's convinced that this monster committed this murder. And now he's got these deaths on his shoulders, and still he can tell no one. No one will believe him. It makes him culpable. He can't tell anyone, and so he's forced to live on with this guilt as Chapter 8 comes to an end. That'll be the end of our discussion today. Again, if you have any questions, make sure you shoot me an email. I hope this video finds you well and enjoy the novel.